All right, good morning, conference attendees. We're so excited for today. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I want to just remind you, first of all, that we do have a 50% discount for first-time members. So if you've never been a member of Georgia TESOL and you're thinking of joining, this is the time. You can either email our amazing registration chair, Jeff Terrell, at jterrell@gatesol.org, or you can stop by our membership booth in the exhibitor hall and leave your name there. All right, I am Jennifer Pendergrass, our conference chair for this year, and I'm honored to introduce you to your keynote speaker for this morning, Dr. Julie Strecker. She served as the Director of International Programs and the English Language Institute at Mercer University since 2013. She has an MA in Foreign Languages and TESOL from West Virginia University and a PhD in Educational Leadership from Mercer University. Dr. Strecker's service to the field of English language teaching and learning includes her current and past positions on the board of UCIEP, a consortium of university and college intensive English programs, and her volunteer work as a site reviewer for the Commission on English Language Program Accreditation. Dr. Strecker has been engaged in the field of international education for over 20 years and continues to be an active member of the National Association of Foreign Student Advisors, the Georgia Association of International Educators, and the Association for International Education Administrators. She was a founding board member of Study Georgia. She has served as an academy coach with the National Association of Foreign Student Advisors, and she has experience reviewing applications and proposals for several professional organizations. Her honors and awards include the NAFSA KCISSS Hugh Jenkins Award, a Fulbright Award for International Education Administrators, and the AIEA Neal Presidential Fellowship. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the incomparable Dr. Julie Strecker.
Well, that was quite an introduction, Jennifer. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I want to welcome everybody to this presentation this morning and thank you for your interest in advocacy. You know, there's always a need for advocacy in our field, but it seems like these times require even more attention to advocacy than others, at least in my professional career. In the past few years, the world of international education and English language learning have experienced a national assault on immigration, especially in relation to refugees, asylum seekers, and DACA recipients, a vilification of Mexican migrants, international students and scholars, and Muslims, and a manipulation of the US Census count that results in dehumanization of undocumented people. Just since May, when I began my term as president of UC, the higher education community has had to mobilize quickly and push back hard on proposed policies that, if enacted, could lead to slow and painful dismantling of our institutions of higher education by virtually eliminating $41 billion, the fourth highest industry in the United States for exports, on which many academic programs and research initiatives are founded. I began my career in international education in the ESL classroom. I think that's why I'm here today. If you had asked me then if I could imagine myself speaking out for students and faculty, staff, and institutions of higher education on a national stage, I would have laughed at you. It's not something that I'm really comfortable doing. I've always spoken up in small circles. I've always advocated for my students or done what I could to help them myself. But the drafting of letters to Congress people asking for support and submitting letters to the Federal Register outwardly expressing disdain for policy, that's not something that I've always been comfortable doing. But through my forced engagement with the challenges our industry has faced over the past years, as the director of a program who has to worry not only about our students, but the livelihood of my faculty and staff, I've learned a very important lesson. And that lesson is that advocacy isn't nearly the challenge that I thought it was in the beginning of my career. I've got a whole new perspective on advocacy. And I now believe that it's one of the most, if not the most important responsibilities that I hold as a director. And I think that we as educators are responsible for. So what I'd like to share with you today are some of the valuable parts of that lesson that I have learned through my experience advocating in the last few years of my professional life. So the question is, what does it take to be an advocate? You know, advocacy, it's not the scary beast that has to be tamed through expert martial arts. It's not something that requires that you have a PhD in rhetoric so that you can run circles around an opponent and debate some of the world-class debaters. It's not something that requires you to have connections on Capitol Hill, you know, so that you can pick up the phone and call your congressman immediately. You don't have to have the perfect personality combination traits according to Myers-Briggs, as you see here, as the advocate. I think, in my opinion and in my experience, what it takes to be an advocate is really just a passion for something and a willingness to speak out and stand up for that passion. In my case, it turns out that advocating for a national organization for our students and for member teachers is something that I've been training for throughout my entire career without even realizing it. You know, the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, what I teach my students, what I do to advocate for my own program to my supervisors, those are all part of the skill set of a good advocate. So you could say that I've gone to the Mr. Miyagi School of Advocacy and I'm waxing on and waxing off my advocacy skills every day without even realizing it. And I feel like, you know, you are all aware of the expectations that there are in the TESOL world for ESL teachers and ELL teachers to be advocates. But what I'm not sure you're aware of is that you already have the skills in your toolbox that you need to be a strong and successful advocate. And that's really what I want to talk about today. So when I talk about advocacy, what I'm really saying is simply, it's an act of standing up and of speaking out. And I really do like to simplify this down to its core. There are two groups of people that we stand up for and speak out about. We talk about our own needs. We advocate for our own needs ourselves. We advocate for the wants of the self. We advocate for the needs of others, and we advocate for the wants of others. And that's the simplest definition I think there is, but I also think that if I polled the audience right now, I'd get very similar answers from everyone. You know, advocacy is putting a voice to somebody's needs, to stand up for somebody else who can't stand up for themselves. What's great is when you combine these things, there's an overlap and there's a sweet spot. And the best outcome of advocacy is that more than one person's needs are met, and it's successful for many. So I want to share a story with you about advocacy, just to kind of help illustrate what I'm saying when we talk about the simplicity of it. And this story is a story of a student that I'm going to call Sarah. She had a dilemma. She was a good student. She was enrolled in a degree program at a university. She'd achieved the appropriate English proficiency to get into her degree program and succeed in her coursework. But she still needed to learn a lot about English and even more about the US academic culture. She hadn't been here very long, maybe 8 months. So she was in the second to last term of her academic career. And in one of her classes, her professor had started to become suspicious of cheating happening in the classroom. And the professor decided that for the final exam, you would require that all the students sign an agreement that they wouldn't cheat. And he had specific things laid out for the students to consider and to promise that they would not engage in. And one of those was having their cell phone on, on their desk or anywhere near themselves during the test. Well, Sarah signed the form and she thought she knew what it meant, but during the test, she was caught with her cell phone on her desk. She wasn't using it. It was actually under some papers, but the professor decided that it was a violation of the agreement that they had signed. He took a picture of her phone and submitted it to the dean for discipline. So there was a hearing, a committee was put together, and unfortunately, Sarah was found guilty of cheating. So she had a negative classroom experience. Because we are a university, there are policies and procedures that help students advocate for themselves when they're in a difficult position. So there was an appeals process for Sarah's situation. And she went through the appeals process. She wrote a letter to the board and asked for them to review her situation. She argued that she wasn't guilty, that even though she had her phone on her desk, she wasn't using it. And she used kind of a rhetorical argument. She said, well, I wasn't, I'm a good student and I make good grades and I wasn't planning to use my phone and I tutor other students and the professor knows I know the material, so how could I possibly be guilty of cheating? But that unfortunately isn't the kind of argument that the committee for the appeals process was expecting. And really the problem for Sarah was that she didn't understand the culture or the cultural context that she needed to operate in order to be successful. So her appeal was denied. And, the next thing that happened was Sarah was experiencing panic and fear because she was, of course, an international student. And the implications for international students when they are suspended are more serious in that they have to choose between staying in the United States or leaving the country because they're no longer in status if they're not enrolled full time. So let's talk about Sarah and talk about where she went wrong. And this kind of feeds into the idea of strategic advocacy, planning your advocacy. And again, we're talking about self-advocacy, but it applies beyond the self. Sarah's message was constructed inappropriately. Sarah's message wasn't addressing the issues that she should have addressed. She was coming to the context from her own perspective. She wasn't bringing to the argument the perspective of the university's values, the university's policies. She really needed that context to be able to make a strong argument. And that was really one of her largest failures. The other thing that she really didn't do was think about her audience, a group of administrators and professors whose job it is to stand up for the values of the university and make sure that the university and all of its stakeholders are abiding by those values. Again, she was new to the community, to the culture, and she didn't understand what was expected and what kind of message, what kind of evidence the audience was expecting to hear. She didn't start with her purpose. She didn't really think about what kind of outcome she would be most successful in setting as her goal. If from her perspective, she wanted them to say, yes, you're innocent and we'll take this away. But there are some issues that make that not possible, and she really wasn't able to see that. Okay. Now my PowerPoint is stuck and my slide is not advancing. There we go. Okay, so yeah.
Do you have slides to show us?
Are you not seeing my slides?
No, I wondered if you had slides or if they were notes, but yeah, we're not seeing that.
Oh my goodness, that, let's see how I can fix that.
Did you already click the screen share button?
Maybe that is the problem. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. Let me start here and I'll just run through these really quick so you can see. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so let me start this show from the beginning. Okay. Are you seeing my entire slide deck, or are you just seeing the first slide?
We just see strategic advocacy and then a video of you playing as well.
Okay, so for whatever reason, I don't have control of that. Here we go, maybe. I apologize. It's not coming up. There we go. Okay, let's see. Thank you, Jennifer, for mentioning that. So this is my presentation. And this was I was talking about what it is to be an advocate. And here is where we're talking about speaking up in advocacy. And this is Sarah's story. And this will all be in the swag bag when this is over. So here we're talking about strategic advocacy. And now we're going to move to a theoretical framework. So I'm going to skip some of that strategic advocacy stuff. So I would like to say that as I prepared for this presentation, I checked out a fairly new publication from 2019. Maybe you're all familiar with it, Advocacy in English Language Teaching and Learning. And I'm really glad I did, because what I got from this publication was a true perspective from the ELL classroom. I gained a lot of insight into what it's like to be in a P12 environment, and it's not something that I had too much experience. And I wanted to share with you specifically some information from the essay that Heather Linville wrote, and she's one of the editors of the book, where she talked about the fact that advocacy requires a knowledge, and the knowledge includes political and organizational literacy. And so that's a little bit of what I was talking about with Sarah, and I'm going to speed up a little bit so I don't run out of time. And so it's a knowledge of collaborative strategies, bringing in other people. And she reminds the reader that in order to be successful in strategic advocacy, you have to be able to identify the stakeholders and the potential issues that they might have, why they might resist some kind of change, and how different actions are better suited for different stakeholders. And she highlights the importance of perspective taking, and especially in terms of crafting a message. And in her own reported research, she talks about the significance of relationship building and the awareness of the challenges involved in developing the art of skillful advocacy. So if I could just take you back to this slide about strategic advocacy quickly, we can kind of see that, that we've got laid out here some of the questions that you need to ask yourself about your audience, including whether or not your audience is an ally, what kind of information your audience needs in order to say yes to what you're asking for, how you're going to present the information, and when you're going to present the information. So all of those go into developing your strategy for advocacy. That out of the way. Okay, so Linville's framework for advocacy, and you can kind of see this here. Let me get the laser pointer up. You've got this triangle of who we're advocating for: families, teachers, and students. And you've got this crossbar of all of the people that you need to collaborate with and bring aboard when you're advocating. And then you've got the outer circle of the purposes for advocacy, whether that's enhancing your life chances, improving learning outcomes, or dealing with social justice issues. All of that becomes part of advocacy. And for some people, I think that can feel a little bit overwhelming. There's so many moving parts, and it's very specific in education. When I've worked with advocacy, I've kind of relied on a different rule of thumb, and I wanted to share that with you today because I see so much parallelism and maybe even a little bit of overlap with Linville's theoretical framework for advocacy. And it starts with the advocate, right? So who's speaking up, who's standing up for somebody. And we're going to use Mr. Miyagi because he's our guru when it comes to preparing yourself for battle in the future. So it takes passion, right? And that passion ultimately becomes your topic. And you need to consider your audience. You need to think about those stakeholders and what they're going to be expecting from you when you submit your appeal to them. That's what your message is. And I, you know, I talked in the title about evidence and research and advocacy, and this is going to be my next slide, how those things are vital when we're talking about constructing the message. And then of course we need the context, and we need the knowledge of the context in order to be a good advocate. So when I looked at Linville's model, this model here came to mind, and maybe those of you who've done some academic work in sociolinguistics or in rhetoric, teaching of writing, this might be familiar to you as it was to me, because this is the framework for the rhetorical situation. And for me, relying on that rhetorical situation has really been the key in successful advocacy. So let's talk about research and evidence, and how we use research and evidence to build a strong message. Evidence is a combination of data and information, and really, you know, it's kind of a backwards design, right? With evidence, you need to know which data to use, which facts, which raw information, in order to present a strong, tailored argument to your audience. Data alone, just facts, doesn't say anything, right? I can give you some examples of facts. For example, 63 million people in the United States in 2018 spoke a language other than English at home. If I just told you that out of the blue, it'd be pretty random and it wouldn't mean anything. But if you combine it, if you put it in a context, it becomes more than data, it becomes information. For example, Korean is one of the most common non-English spoken languages in Georgia. So we've got a lot of people in the country speaking non-English languages at home, and Korean is the second largest non-English spoken language in Georgia. So that's a combination of some data. It's information, it's compound, and I'm going to give you a context, Georgia, right? And then we think about evidence. So what are we trying to say with this information? What question are we trying to answer? How, you know, what yes do we need from our audience in order to be successful with our advocacy? So I've got another story, and I'm going to run through it a little bit quickly so we don't run out of time. You know, data can be scary, and the idea of quantitative data specifically, if you're not a mathematician, can be especially scary. My experience a number of years ago working at a university as an international student advisor involved constructing an argument for an advocacy situation that required data, and I was not comfortable with data. So in this situation, the first thing that happened, I was the international student advisor, and faculty members started coming to me with concerns because they had students who were non-English speakers who were not performing to the extent that they felt they should be able to perform. So there was concern among the faculty about the success of these students. And this is also a form of advocacy. Harrison and Prado call this transitive advocacy, where they want to advocate for, you've got a person who wants to advocate for the student, but they don't have the expertise necessary. So they came to me because they knew I had a background in second language acquisition. And they knew that I have a soft heart, and it's not hard to get me to jump up and work for students' needs. So what I did was start thinking about the problem, you know, that the students weren't being successful. And many of these students had come through our intensive English program and then joined the university. And so I had a hunch, you know, what it was, what could have been the problem that was holding the students back. But in the context of the university, where we have professors and deans and researchers, I knew that I couldn't just go to the dean with a hunch and say, okay, here's what I think we need to do because I have this hunch about why this is the problem. I needed evidence, I needed data, but I didn't know where to begin. So I also used a form of transitive advocacy, and I enlisted a professor from statistics, and I said, can you help me? He listened to me talk about my problem. He listened to me talk about my hunch. And he was able to put together some questions and run a study. And he did a multiple regression study, which, at that point meant nothing to me. I had no idea what multiple regression was. But he was able to show with statistical evidence that my hunch was right. And so with that data in hand, I was able to craft a proposal for the dean in terms of developing an extra course and also kind of bypassing a different set of courses that were set up for students that weren't on the campus in the undergraduate environment. So we created a class in the undergraduate environment, and then we began to see a greater success among the students who were coming with limited English skills. So, that idea of advocacy being a team effort is very clear in this example, and it's something that I think is important for anybody to consider when you are in the position of being an advocate, and that is kind of building your advocacy team and finding your allies. And that's especially important when you know that you're coming up against somebody who may be resistant or even hostile to ideas that you have in order to improve somebody's situation. And so, finding a bridge person, a secondary advocate, a transient advocate is important in helping to finally build a relationship with that person who might be resistant to change. So I just wanted to show you briefly again, the parallelism between Linville's advocacy model and the rhetorical situation, because I feel like sometimes we get bogged down in the complications and the theory of issues like advocacy, and sometimes we think that it's going to be a lot more complicated and difficult than it really is. And for those of us who are skilled in the rhetorical situation or have a really strong understanding of it, teach it to our students, I think relying on that simplified theoretical framework can help us be stronger advocates. So, I have given you two stories, and they were institutional stories. And a lot of you, I'm sure, advocate on a daily basis, and you are stretched thin, and you're tired, and your needs are maybe not being met because you're pushing so hard to meet your students' needs. And you think anything bigger than what I'm doing for my students or what I'm doing in my classroom or for my classroom situation is either a waste of time or it's just too big. And if that is the way you're thinking, I'd like to share with you a thought that Esther de Jong shared in the foreword of the book that I showed you a little bit ago, and that is that to be advocates, we must choose to be well informed and take the time to share our understanding and information with different stakeholders through the various media at multiple policy levels. And so I put together a chart here that kind of shows the variables in advocacy, whether it's inter-institutional or extra-institutional, are the same, right? You have to think about stakeholders, you have to think about resources, you have to think about your network, and you have to craft your communications and communicate at the right time, in the right manner, to the right people. So, the details there, interinstitutionally and extra-institutionally, may change, but the skill set and the analysis, oh my gosh, my light just went off, are the same. Whoops. Okay, so this is where I just want to rely on Horton. Here's a who and all of the who's down in Whoville to remind you that with advocacy, especially big issues that are policy driven and politically charged, they need everybody's voice. And the best example I have for that is the issue that happened this summer when the federal government was planning to send all international students home who weren't enrolled in a face-to-face class by the start of the fall semester. That would have caused innumerable problems for our students and our institutions. And we moved swiftly and quickly and put thousands and thousands of voices out there. And the federal government made a swift U-turn even before the court cases went to court, they walked back that policy that they had put out there. Some of you may be familiar with this and some of you might not, but the reality is that the more we speak out and the more we speak out together, the stronger our voice is going to be heard. And you know, advocacy is a team effort, and we have a number of organizations that help us. And so the point that I want to leave you with today, and I know I'm running out of time, is that you are in the classroom and you know your students best, and you know what your students need, and you know what your students' challenges are and what they struggle with, and you know what the outcomes are of a lot of the policies that are out there. And you might not have the statistical data that you need, and you might not have the bigger information, but we have a number of professional organizations who regularly look at those numbers and gather that information and keep us abreast of the policies. If you stay in tune with some of the websites that I've listed here, TESOL advocacy, NAFSA advocacy, you can stay on top of, you know, what issues need attention the most. Where our industry needs your help beyond your classroom is in relaying your students' stories, you know, your voice, your direct information. Each student's story is a qualitative piece of data. And if any of you do qualitative research, you know that, the more stories you have with similar themes, the stronger your data is. So what I would ask you to do as teachers is collect your students' stories and keep them close, so that if if you're ever called to advocate, you have an arsenal already ready. And I know you're worried about what happened with Sarah, and I do want to tell you, and I'm going to breeze through this really quickly. Sarah, she had the opportunity to re-appeal her case. She needed to review her status or her strategy, and she needed to understand the context and the audience and the resources. She found an advocate. Her advocate was able to help her by building trust with her and convincing her of a different direction to take her argument. They actually looked at the policies of the universities, and it was determined that the sanction that she had received for cheating was 10 times more stringent than what it should have been. And so her advocate was able to convince her to argue that she was indeed guilty of having her cell phone, but that cheating was not a reason for dismissal from the university. She was able to revise her message and convince the administration that, yes, maybe she had done something wrong, but the punishment was far beyond what the university believed was fair, and she was successful. And that advocate, it took a lot of back channeling and networking. So it wasn't just Sarah and her advocate working together to solve this problem, but there were a number of people involved. It takes time and it takes energy, but they were successful, and Sarah learned a very important lesson. So the last thing I want to leave you with today is a quote from Adichie, which is that many stories matter. Stories can be used to dispossess and malign, but stories can also be used to lift people up. And you are the keeper of the stories as the educator in the classroom. You have so many stories, and some of the stories you remember easily, and some of the stories you forget. So if there's a way for you to be more mindful about keeping your stories, those stories one by one will add up to be the data and the information and the evidence that you need to do all kinds of things, to advocate with fellow teachers about what works and what doesn't work in the classroom with their content students, to advocate with your principal or your administrators about whether or not the curriculum is working or whether or not your approach is working, to advocate with state legislatures about policies and where resources are being spent when potentially it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and with the federal government. We have an industry here, and we take care of a very special population of people, and we have to protect that industry. And in order to do that, we need to advocate together. So if there is time, I'm happy to take questions.
Dr. Strecker, this is Elizabeth Webb. I'm the moderator for the Q&A, and thank you so very much for your presentation. From the chat, so quite all of us are so inspired by your words, and I just wanted to tell you that from me personally, please know that your expression and your passion at the beginning of the presentation came through, and the message was not lost at all by not having the PowerPoint slides. The PowerPoint slides were wonderful, but it's great to see you as an advocate on the screen. We have some questions that I'd like to get to you and give you the opportunity to answer. First of all, from Darla Watts. She remarks that she's an advocate on a daily basis, but she's questioning how she best can advocate for larger issues, and how does she start that process? For example, for the school board, for the state, is it best to try to approach people through a meeting, phone calls? Do you have some explicit ways that she should try to advocate to share her stories?
Yeah, so I would say start with your organization. Start with Georgia TESOL, start with the Board of Education. See what issues are, first of all, being put out there where there might be an ask. Because if you look at the TESOL website or the Georgia TESOL website, from time to time you'll see on the advocacy page that they're telling you, here's an issue, we need your voice. So, being in tune with the leadership there, I think, is the first place to start. And then, thinking about the legislation, just writing to your congressperson, your state congressperson, the state legislators, and say, I want to tell you some stories. You've been voting against these things, and you don't need a larger body to push you to do that. But if you have a group of people together who are kind of pushing the same legislator to consider something, I think that's valuable. So if you have a network of teachers in your district or in your county who are all kind of experiencing the same problem, and it's based on some sort of legislation, then coming together and working together through a Google Doc, you don't have to meet face to face. Somebody needs to start with a first draft, and that's always the hardest part. But if you can work together and be open and collaborate and be willing to have people say, okay, this might not work and that might not work, you can craft a really strong statement and include some of those stories in that statement, and you've got a powerful message.
That is such a great suggestion for us all, to be able to collaborate and put those stories together to present, because I think it really is the narrative, understanding the lives of our students, that changes hearts and minds on a policy level. Comments from the chat box are, I've always advocated for my students, but after your presentation, I'm inspired and feel that I might actually be able to advocate on a larger scale. And also a question from that came from Angela Vander Linden. And then Paulette Thompson commented, and she asked if your story, and I believe she's referencing the story regarding your student, if it's been used or created as a lesson for students who are planning to attend higher education classes, and I'm guessing, I'm thinking here that she's thinking about to inspire them and help them understand how to self-advocate.
We haven't incorporated into any kind of orientation program formally. It's definitely a story that we like to use when we're trying to illustrate certain things, but that is a great idea to make it a formal incorporation or a lesson in an orientation program or something like that. And I mean, if anybody would be interested in collaborating with me and putting something together, just reach out. You've got my email address here. I would be happy to help. I love curriculum development, actually. So, I would be happy to help put something together that would teach students what they need to be able to advocate for themselves.
That is fantastic. And look right here in our on advocacy, we have a project bubbling up that's going to help students advocate for themselves. Comment from Valerie Stopsinski, thanks, and she loves the challenge to be the keeper of the stories. Jackie Sandin, up in Clark County, a former school board member. The school board are not K-12 educators, so they don't know the ESL students themselves, but they are open to hear the stories, and so they need to hear those stories. Jill Schmidt is asking, What are your thoughts on how a classroom teacher can better understand the legislative action that is occurring? She reads emails that she receives from Paige, but also finds herself getting lost in the legal jargon. And I know you're going to have an answer for that, but Jill, I would also encourage you to pay attention to what Georgia TESOL is sending out, and hopefully you will join us if you're not already a member. Maybe think about joining us as a member so that we can engage you and support you in knowing what those issues are. Julie, what else would you say? Excuse me, Dr. Strecker, what else would you say?
Well, Dr. Webb, I mean, I completely echo you. Georgia TESOL was going to be my first go-to as well. You know, I think that's helpful. But, you know, in terms of trying to engage colleagues and build bridges and relationships in your own institution, take some of that stuff to your government faculty and ask them to explain it to you, because in a way you would be kind of subversively alerting their attention to some of these problems as they try and translate it to you, and then they may become interested in the issue as well.
I love that. That's a fantastic suggestion. I'm looking here through the chat to see what else we have. Jackie Sandin also suggests talking with the board representatives. Sonia Stone echoes the importance of collecting the stories, and I really did love that idea of collecting them and working together to share them. Tiffany Diebold is commenting, it's almost as if we are the giver of our classrooms and collect the experiences, and she is meaning that from the Lois Lowry book. Sean Bagley is commenting that he really appreciates very much that you shared Adichie's quote from The Danger of a Single Story. That is such a great TED Talk to share with everyone. I'm not seeing any more questions, and our time, we do have a little bit more time, so let me just encourage everyone, one last call out. This is your chance to ask Dr. Strecker for her thoughts on how you can from your particular context advocate. So don't hesitate to type a question in the chat. We'll give it about another 30 seconds or a minute for you guys to do that. In the meantime, Dr. Strecker, hearing the comments, do you have any other thoughts to share?
Well, I would say that, you know, I'm inspired. It's very exciting to think that, you know, there are now people who are thinking, hey, maybe I can do this because that makes me feel like I've done my job. And, you know, I love being a part of this community. Sometimes I get bogged down in my own work and, you know, my other networks, UCEEP and NAFSA, and I forget sometimes about the Georgia network, but I'm inspired to stay more in touch with Georgia TESOL and be more involved in the issues that are happening at the K-12 level, because ultimately those do impact higher education as well. I'm not hearing anything.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I double-clicked mute instead of I remuted. I really appreciate your comments there, because I do believe that the power of the community is critical here. I'm looking through the chat, and the last question I see is from Liz Galasso, who's commenting that she sees that it will be recorded. Dr. Strecker, you should know that she says that this presentation will resonate with her all day, and she would love to refer back to it and wants to know how she can do that. So great job. Liz, I believe that because this has been recorded, this will be available to you through the conference app. And perhaps I can ask Dr. Pendergrass to come off mute for just a second and confirm if I'm correct about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so I'm absolutely happy. I will share my slides in the swag bag, and then yeah, we will get the recording out there as soon as possible.
That is fantastic. We really appreciate it so much. So thank you all for being here. And Dr. Strecker, thank you for an amazing keynote and for inspiring us all. I do would like to now help us transition. I think we're a little early, but if it's okay, we'll transition on to the Georgia TESOL business meeting, which is the next thing on the agenda as part of the keynote session. And that's going to be led by President Wickersham. But if I could take 20 seconds to just connect two dots here. At the beginning of this presentation, Dr. Pendergrass, who raised the point about Georgia TESOL offering membership, first-time membership at 50% off. The reason we're doing this is because the board is so passionate about wanting everyone to be engaged. And we just want this community to be as strong as it can be. And I know you're going to hear about some wonderful things through the business meeting. I just wanted to take a moment and say you're all invited to be part of this fantastic community. And we hope you'll take advantage of that. Mr. Wickersham, are you ready?
And I just want to say thank you again, very quickly. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
I believe we all of us on Georgia TESOL feel the same way. Thank you so much, Dr. Strecker.
Yes, absolutely inspirational. Thank you so much.